Seneca Rocks here in Pendleton County. On this trip we will see Seneca Rocks in Franklin. We will also talk to Jesse Seitz of the Pendleton County Chamber of Commerce, and he'll tell us a little bit about the attractions the county has to offer. We will later talk to DeWayne Borror and Dyer of the Pendleton County Historical Society, and both will give us a detailed account of some of the county's history and culture.
The early settlement occurred between 1747 and 1750. In that period of time, they bought land and started the settlement, and then it took off after that. Largely Scots-Irish, German, Pennsylvania Dutch, and some English and Dutch. But the predominant culture was Scots-Irish and German, and there are three. We're in the Upper Potomac Basin, so we're east of the Allegheny Mountains, which kind of dictated where settlers came from. They came into Baltimore and Philadelphia, primarily Philadelphia, and then either down the Shenandoah Valley and across the mountain, or up the Potomac. And we're near the headwaters of the Potomac. Where headwaters was 15 miles down the road.
In April of 1758, Indians from Ohio, under the command of Chief Kilbuck, led raids into Pendleton County. They attacked Fort Upper Track and burned it to the ground. All men there were killed. No survivors, so there's not a lot of history left, not a lot of stories from there. The next day, Fort Sybert, just a little ways over the county, was attacked. It was surrounded. A lot of stories on the events that happened that day. They was asked to surrender the fort and they would be spared. Actually, when the gates were opened, the Indians went in, killed half, separated them, and many of the fort burned down, and many of the men, women, and children were carried off to Ohio. On the way, all the valuables in the fort, considered treasure, which would be different than what we're considering treasure today probably, was carried by two Indians in a pot between two poles. And as they started up South Fork Mountain, the two Indians keep falling behind because of the heavy weight. They both disappeared for a while, and then when they rejoined the party, they no longer had the pot. So it was assumed that they buried it, hid it, or whatever. And that is a treasure that is still searched for to this day. That we have the Treasure Mountain Festival in September each year, third weekend, and that is the basis for it.
The teenage boy, I'm a direct descendant of Roger Dyer, who was the head of the first settlement, and he was killed in the massacre, and his son, James, was a teenager and was captured by the Indians and taken to Ohio. He escaped. He was taken there with his sister, and he escaped, came back, and then went back and got his sister a couple years later and brought her back, and they were both important figures. She and her husband were important figures in the settlement of the county. I mean, they were justices of the forming county. What then was Virginia, and he outlived 3 wives, and he had 16 children, so everybody in the county is related to him, I'd have to say that. But both of the Germans and the Scots-Irish, this was what they were looking for, this kind of a place. The Scots-Irish were trying to get away from the British, and they wanted, and the British, the eastern part of Virginia was perfectly happy to have a buffer against the Indians, and so they encouraged this settlement of the Scots-Irish on the frontier and didn't bother them too much, which is the way the Scots-Irish wanted it, and the Germans We're very much the same. I'm a descendant of a Hessian soldier that was captured at Yorktown and turned loose at Winchester, and he settled on the North Fork here, and you know, he was familiar with this type of terrain, and they formed very creative mountain agriculture, and they really liked what they saw. And the other fort here is Fort Hinkle, one of the other forts on the North Fork, Germany Valley, and that was largely German descendants who went originally to North Carolina and then came up northwest and settled over there, and they continued to be prominent people in that part of the county and in the government of the county right up to this day.
Hinkle's Fort was built sometime around 1761. No trace of it exists to this day. But Germany Valley, in which Hinkle's Fort was built, is so called because of the Hinkles, German people who settled here. It reminded them so much of home that it's still to this day called Germany Valley. Revolutionary War. It was garrisoned by John Justice Hinkle as commander of the fort, and his son-in-law was captain of the militia troop, and his sons actually became captains following the war. But during the Revolutionary War, it was quartered colonial troops.
The Dollies, who settled over in that area as well, and Dolly Sods is a scenic attraction here and a real natural wonder. But that name was anglicized from the German name Dolly, D-A-H-L-E, and that was my ancestor that was the Hessian soldier. He and his family settled over there, and they were used to this, taking their livestock to mountain pastures in Germany, and so that's what they did. They cleared off the top of Spruce Knob and various places and moved their animals up there in the summertime and brought them back down in the winter, just like they had in the old country. That's one of the big attractions of this county, is that so many people whose ancestors settled here continue to live here, and you know, the culture gets diffused over time. But on the other hand, we probably preserve more of it than we would if we weren't located where we are, relatively isolated.
Pendleton County, being located where it is geographically, east of the Alleghenies, at the time of the war was more like the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. Whenever people hear West Virginia, they automatically think, oh, they all fought for the North. People have that idea that it's a straight division line, but that's not so. Pendleton County was predominantly Confederate, sent 800 to 900 men to fight for the Confederacy. There was possibly 300 men that fought for the North, but not in regular units. Most of them served in home guards. They were men who decided to stay loyal to the Union. They organized themselves into groups. In 1863, after West Virginia was formed as a state, these home guards were given the status of state troops. They were armed and equipped by the state of West Virginia. But Pendleton County itself, I said, was predominantly Confederate. 3 days before Robert E. Lee surrendered on April 9th, Pendleton County was still holding court under the laws of Virginia. They didn't go down easy, as did none of the counties that currently border Virginia.
This year is particularly important in the history of Franklin because the Battle of McDowell took place this year, and that's just across the line in Virginia, south of here. Stonewall Jackson's troops, and on the north, John C. Fremont and others, and so they retreated. The Union forces did to Franklin, and Franklin was occupied by 20,000 Union troops. Franklin has 750 people now, and that's about what it had then. So you can imagine 20,000 troops swarming all over Franklin for 6 weeks or whatever the time period was. They occupied a prominent house here in town and had the headquarters here, and Stonewall Jackson actually chased them down here to about maybe 10 miles south of here, and then he crossed back over into Virginia and didn't pursue them any further. But we're celebrating the anniversary of that, and we will have an exhibit here at the museum for the rest of the year dealing with that period of time.
James Boggs, prior to the war, very prominent man in the county, served many offices, sheriff, the school board, a merchant. He was also the brigadier general of the Virginia Militia Regiment from this county. Well, the brigade in which this county is a part of. He commanded the 18th Brigade. The Pendleton County Regiment is the 46th Virginia. And James, when the war broke out, decided to remain loyal to the South, and as did his several sons. James had a brother, John Boggs, who lived near Seneca, and he couldn't see it the same way. He was the youngest child in the family, and he decided to fight for the North, and as did his sons. And John became a captain in the local Home Guard. But the county was split in many ways. But Franklin, the county seat, suffered more in May of 1862 than it did throughout the rest of the war. Part of Stonewall Jackson's Valley Campaign. Union troops moved into Franklin in hot pursuit of Stonewall Jackson, who they encountered at McDowell, Virginia. Battle fought on May 8th, 1862. And as Dyer said, this is the 150th anniversary of that battle. The Yankees lost. The people in Franklin listened to the Battle of McDowell raging. They could hear the cannon and the gunfire, though it's that far away. And they knew who had won when the Union troops started retreating into town. And as he said, they encamped here for about a month and cleaned out everything. Livestock, houses, any property they wanted. It's just an invading force, and people wonder why people in this area, not being large slaveholders and where it was located, why they'd fight for the South. As I believe the people at that time didn't see the United States the way we do today. Your state was your country. They was fighting for the state of Virginia. Just like Robert E. Lee could not turn his back on Virginia to fight for the North. But throughout the rest of the war, Pendleton County had a lot of raids through it, a lot of little actions, which probably most of them has never been recorded. The Home Guard that we was talking about led raids throughout the county, and they was counteracted by Confederate guerrilla units such as the Pendleton County Dixie Boys, which opposed each other in many elaborated accounts of their encounters between each other. A lot of them very humorous, but when it comes down to the actual what was going on, it's sad. By 1864, wasn't looking as good for the Confederacy. The jailhouse in Franklin was burned by the Union Home Guard, so they couldn't hold any more of their prisoners. There was many raids into the town and throughout the county. People see the Pendleton County as being split, and it is to a point. A lot of people think the North Fork of Pendleton thought totally for the North. That is not true. Riverton, south, the Circleville, was predominantly Confederate. Of course, you got Yankees sprinkled around throughout. And Seneca would have been definitely in Union territory, as would an upper tract on the South Branch, which leads into Grant County, present-day Grant County, the Union section of Hardy County at that time. But by the end of the war, South, due to overwhelming odds, had to surrender.
Well, the other thing, people somewhat wonder why there is still such strong feeling about the Civil War here, of all places, kind of a non-slave holding area. But if you read, there's a book that was written by the founder of the Pendleton County Historical Society, who was a prominent local lawyer, and he interviewed the remaining Civil War veterans, and his book was published called Twixt North and South, and he recorded the observations of these people. And it's, when you think about it, unlike these big battles where there were somewhat impersonal masses of people being killed, which was terrible, and the destruction was terrible, here they were very personal conflicts. Small numbers of people, relatives, split in actually shooting each other. There were neighbors attacking other neighbors, and it just seems high and likely. So as I say, there was personal bitterness that continues to this day because these people felt so strongly about what they were doing, and it had such a personal attachment to it. And in my own case, my great-great-grandfather was General James Boggs of the Confederacy, and my great-great-grandfather on the other side of my family was John Boggs, who was the senior Union officer here, captain of the Home Guard. And so the families were split and have been split pretty much to the current generation. I mean, they just lived in different parts of the county, saw things differently, lived lives that were very different. And, you know, it's a part of our history and a part of our culture that it can't be ignored.
In May of 1862, when Fremont's and Milroy's troops were in town, a gentleman, Ambrose Meadows, who was a Brethren minister, he had served in the Confederate militia, though he was a Union sympathizer. He thought it was his duty to serve. He was out with his militia brigade under Stonewall Jackson. Minor skirmishes, nothing major. He got sick and returned home. In May of '62, when Fremont was here, Union troops went to his house east of town. And while they was there, they ran into Confederate soldiers who had just stopped by to get some milk. This couple men, Union soldiers, got shot at, run back to town and said they had been ambushed by 100 Confederate soldiers. So the troops were sent to Ambrose's home. He intercepts and tries to convince them otherwise that the events that was going on was done by the soldiers and not by the local men, such as a telegraph wire that had been cut. But when they arrived at his home, Confederate soldiers again was there. Events led to, they set a mill on fire near the home and threatened to throw Ambrose into it. He, of course, pleaded and said he wanted to pray. They shot him through the head and bayoneted him. The mill was burned down. His home was burned down. His wife and 3 small children threw out in the yard and found later by family. That it's just a cruel and wanton murder. It wasn't what it should have been. And here at the museum we have a couple relics that was left from the fire, from the house and the family.
Well, both World Wars had a big impact on the population of the county because a lot of people had never left home until they were forced out. We'd been through a period of relative tranquility, and while they left during the Civil War and fought all over, there hadn't been a reason for them to leave, so they were pretty isolated. And we have exhibits here at the museum of the World Wars and the people in Pendleton County. We do have a number of pictures of troops that were taken in the courthouse in various times leaving to go overseas in World War I. But World War II in particular, because I was born in '38, so I was here during, they had a unit, mountain climbing unit that trained at Seneca Rock, so they set up a camp, and there were a lot of convoys of troops. As a kid, I would sit down here right down at the intersection right below this museum and watch the troop trains go through and come back. And that, the troops being here had a big impact. It was the Mountain Division that was getting ready to go into the Alps. But in general, people that were here and drafted into the service left, and many never came back. They got jobs, and then gradually they retire and come back, and one thing and another, but their lives were disrupted. Those that were not actually in the war left to go work in defense industries in Baltimore, shipyards, in Charleston, West Virginia, in the industrial part of West Virginia. And so it had a tremendous influence of disrupting what was a relatively secluded rural community, and it changed forever. We now have a Navy base here in West Virginia, of all places, and it was and it has had a big impact on the county. I mean, there are not that many people stationed there, but it is a force in the community, and a lot of people who train there continue on and live here, retire here, like it. I remember collecting scrap metal and milkweed pods and all those kind of things that were a part of the community efforts. My mother worked in the rationing board, and it was just a really a major time that I see in our historical development.
My grandfather was too old to be in service, but he was part of what they called the Farm War Service. So he was growing crops to send to the Army.
My family, as a matter of fact, right after World War II, we were always in the livestock business and have been ever since we left Scotland. And we started a home delivery dairy, and I was the milk boy. I rode on the back of the pickup, and we did everything from milking the cows to bottling the milk and delivering it. And we did that for a number of years, but it was just a wonderful place to go to school. We had teachers who had started teaching during the Depression, and they continued on to teach, and they were well trained, well educated. It had been a good job, and they had been in there, so we really got what I thought was an excellent education. West Virginia communities support sports. That's a big thing today, and it was big then. I mean, we weren't necessarily all that successful. My mother was on a basketball team in the 1929 to 32 that was undefeated in 3 years. They were written up in the Baltimore Sun. They played college teams, and they didn't have a gym. They played in the Ford garage until the gym was built. So they had to play on the road all the time. But they were, they were outdoor people, physically rugged, and enjoyed competition. I mean, they really liked that, and that was a big part of the ambiance of being here and being a part of it. I played football, was co-captain of the football team here, and played basketball and baseball, but it has changed somewhat, but it's still very much like that. We were started in 1929 by the local attorney, former school board superintendent, who wrote Twixt North and South, and had an extensive collection of historical material, and he got it started. The secretary was Miss Elsie Boggs, who left her home to be our museum, and her daughter was a president of the Historical Society at one time, and she had another daughter who was a vice president. So the Boggs family has been important in the society itself, but also in the recording of history. Miss Elsie wrote the history of Franklin. She kept copious notes, a diary that recorded events that no other than if you read the newspapers, you would not know anything about this, because it's never in any recorded history. She has documented everything that went on pretty much during her lifetime, and we are copying those diaries to preserve them. We're copying them electronically and to have them as a part of our record. But since you go back to 1929, we have complete collections of old newspapers, and people have been very generous over the years to leave stuff to the society because they want it they know if it goes with their families who have moved elsewhere and one thing and another, that it's just not going to be preserved. So we have a really uniquely valuable collection. And the newsletter, which we started, really we didn't do anything different. We just started telling people what we were doing. And the membership increased from 70 to 260 in 3 years. So once people realize that you're actually doing something and not talking about how great granddaddy was or something, they really were willing to do. And so we have had DeWayne's on our board, and he has been a big part of a lot of the historical markers and the things that we have a monument down at the courthouse that he was.
Well, within the county here, we got several different historic organizations who work together so well for a common cause, and the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and we have members of the Sons of Union Veterans just for that. We have Daughters of the Confederacy, Daughters of the American Revolution, Sons of the American Revolution, and of course members are involved with each organization, a lot of them, so you got a lot of the same people overall, but it's a common cause, and through that we've been able to accomplish a lot and bring a lot of history to the county. As Dyer said, we are currently erecting a monument at the courthouse as a memorial to the men from Pendleton County who served on both sides of the war between the states, and put up several other things throughout the county. But we've been very fortunate to have this house left to the Historical Society, which is the oldest standing structure in the county. Built about 1760, 3 miles north of town, moved to this location sometime afterwards. The house was the home of Captain John Moomaw during the war between the states. Several important figures in the county history have lived here. The Historical Society at present is rotating displays yearly as we raise funding to expand and enclose and preserve the history of this house and the donations that's been given to us, which are always welcome and greatly received.
Pendleton County is one of those counties that's just rich in nature. We are home to many iconic images of the state of West Virginia. For example, we're home to Spruce Knob, which is indeed the highest point in West Virginia, and we share it with Randolph County. They contain the lake, we contain the highest point, and there's some great hiking trails in that area. Another huge iconic image that the state uses as a face of a lot of their advertising sometimes is Seneca Rocks. Seneca Rocks is a land formation. There's Seneca Rocks Discovery Center right below it, where they use as educational purposes for group tours. A lot of kids, schools will come in. You can hike the trail that takes you to the base of the rocks, and a lot of people come from all over just for that chance to climb Seneca Rocks. It's not a new formation, but it's kind of a new face to the county. Nelson Rocks Outdoor Center, which is home to the Via Ferrata. There's only 3 in the country of the United States. It's mostly a European thing. But what it is an alternative way of rock climbing. There's iron bars that are put into the rocks, and actually Via Ferrata stands for Way of Iron. And that's becoming a very popular thing to do in this county, and they've actually last year just opened up a canopy tour, which is zip lining. They added 12 zip lines, 3 sky bridges, and a 40-foot rappel at the end. So that's become quite popular in the past year. So there's been a lot of people coming to this area just for those purposes. We pull a lot from the D.C. area. A lot of those folks want to get away from the city life and kind of escape to the outdoors, which Pendleton County is a great place to do that. Great hunting and great fishing in this area. A lot of folks come all over just for that. And like I said before, it's definitely the scenic attraction, one of the best I think in the state. A big part of the county, and especially its future, is going to be tourism. Because of where we're located, it's not a great place for big business to come in. We're not close to interstate. We don't have access to railroads, so we're definitely going to have to play off the fact that we are a tourism-heavy area. As far as economics, that's what we are going to have to play off of for the future. Like I said previously, it's what we have here that people are drawn to. And if we can keep them here, that's one of the big things that we're going to have to do to sustain this area in the next 10, 15, 20 years and longer. There's been studies done to where Pendleton County's population is indeed declining just because of the age groups that are located in this area. So one thing that the Chamber of Commerce tries to do, as well as the different organizations in the county, is try to bring in more young persons into the area to teach them like what we have to offer and what they can develop for the future, to make this county sustain itself and to sustain others within the county. And so part of some of the economic growth in the area, besides tourism, is the history, which plays a big part into the tourism industry. We're rich. We're rich in Civil War history. If you look at some of the architecture in the town, you can tell that a lot of these homes were built pre-Civil War. So another big part, in addition to the history, is our festivals. We play off of our culture for these festivals. Our biggest festival is in September of every year. It's called the Treasure Mountain Festival. It isn't indeed the heritage festival for the county. It brings in between 15 and 20,000 folks from all over the country every year. We have vendors that come from as far as North Carolina just to come to our little town to set up and sell to the public, because it's just such a huge drawing, and that is one of the things that our businesses live for each year. It's when those 20,000 people come into the county. Where else are they going to go besides right here during that weekend? So we try to keep them we're as hospitable as possible, so we can have them back each and every year. Another thing that's been increasing in this area that we can definitely play off for in the future is the increase of motorcycle traffic. The economy took a hit for a lot of folks, but one industry that did not suffer as much as others is motorcycles. They're more efficient as far as driving, and people who still want a vacation trades in cars to get motorcycles so they can just drive. Since this county is full of scenic beauty, they like to come to this area just to ride. Yeah, Seneca Rocks is one of the best rock climbing destinations. Since the Discovery Center is federally owned, it changes hands periodically. It just changed hands last year, and I know that the gentleman there has some new visions that he'd like he has a new vision for what he wants to do with the rocks, and I'm hoping with the businesses around Seneca Rocks that rock climbing will become a huge sport. And I've heard from folks from Nelson Rocks Outdoor Center who take groups over there just to climb the rocks of how difficult it is and how much they enjoy that difficulty. And once they reach the top, it's just, there's no better vision when you're that high looking down. And just not Seneca Rocks. There's great climbing destinations besides the rocks in this area. Champ Rocks, it is part of the National Forest. It takes about a half a day to hike to the base of the rocks, but once you're there, they say that too is some of the hardest rock climbing in this county and in the state, and probably in the East. Rock climbing is a vision of our future. It's going to be a huge industry, and if we can keep pulling those folks in each year and find new things for them to tackle, then it's definitely going to help the county.
Thank you.